Good morning. My name is Randall, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. I want to thank Joan for all the work that she's done to help put this service together. The work of the worship associate, so much of it is behind the scenes, but working hand in hand with Joan, putting this service together with the music and the selection of readings, there's a real craftsmanship. I hope to add to that. The service is coming by a rather strange route. It's been led by two ministers. I originally submitted this to a writers group led by the Reverend Judy Campbell, who liked it, said, maybe this belongs in the pulpit, and made a recommendation to Art, who, when he saw it, said, go ahead. You do the 29th of January. So given that background, I better not disappoint. I asked, because sometimes I have a tendency, and it's a bad habit, especially if you're a public speaker, to kind of swallow my words and kind of garble them a little bit. So if anything, at any point, my words are less than clear, or you can't hear them, just give me a sign. Either slow down, speed up, or speak more clearly. I had a remarkable life growing up in Kingston. I spent time at my grandmother's house, which was an 18-room rambling Victorian house on Grove Street that had some unusual features. Had inside-out houses. Trust me, really, they were inside-out houses in the attached barn, and there were 4 seats. And I always thought it was kind of strange as a kid. I said, why so many seats? You don't really have that much company when you're doing your business. It's called movement. You move one side to the other. Anyways, yeah, flush. That's a little more detail than we need to get into. But her house was a remarkable place. We had scrolls from the King of France, not the King of France, the King of Sweden, hanging on the wall because my great-grandfather started the first co-op society in North America, was located here in Kingston. The windowsills were covered with arrowheads that my grandmother had dug out of the garden in her house. If her house was a museum, the other place I lived was a shack, 2 rooms, built 1890, a hay shanty down on Duxbury Beach. As a young child, it had everything I could possibly want. Access to the beach. That was it. That's all you needed. That was paradise. So if my grandmother's house was a museum and the shack was paradise, my grandfather's house was a school of dreams. For 1 week each summer, my grandmother let me spend time with my grandpa, who lived 5 miles away in Clifton, Massachusetts. It's off 106. You know where Kingston Trailers is? Just as the last business just before you leave Kingston. My grandfather's house was right diagonally across the street. And that used to be all open fields once upon a time. His home was a 300-year-old farmhouse located on 100 acres of farmland deep in the forest. The house had no electricity, no running water, no central heating. Except for age, it was virtually unchanged from the day in 1650 when it first opened as a colonial roadside inn. Imagine being able to spend at least 1 week each summer in a virgin colonial home. It was a little island in time that somehow had escaped the benefits of the 20th century. Even the windows contained the original handmade wavy glass, so common in antique houses. I used to spend time looking, because if you changed your position as you looked out the window, the landscape waved and danced. I was just fascinated by that. After my grandparents got divorced, my grandmother my grandmother lived on Grove Street. My grandfather lived alone in the house. Simple but delicious meals were prepared on an ancient wood cook stove located in the corner of the kitchen. By the way, take a look at the front page of your order of service. That is a picture of my grandfather. The young man, that is his kitchen, and the young man you see that's so full of joy and laughter is my cousin, Charles Grosclose, right at the back. So we've come a little bit of a full circle. The stove was a smoky thing, and everything we ate or wore had the comfortable, mellow, brown flavor of wood. Food and milk stayed fresh and safe in a lovely wooden bucket at the bottom of the deep stone well. Even the hottest days of August, water from that well was always cold and clear. In the evenings, after dinner dishes were finished, he and I would sit for hours at the kitchen table, and I listened as he filled the night with one story after another. Shadows from the flickering yellow light of the kerosene lantern moved on the walls as he unveiled countless tales of knights, unicorns, leprechauns, elves, and the travels of Gulliver. Look over there, he would say, pointing to the shelf above the stove. Those 3 boxes of cereal are just like the sailors on the great whaling ships. They used to hunt the whales. And over there, that butter dish, that looks just like the dories the men would use to hunt the great whales. His words transformed the kitchen into the whaling grounds of the ships from the saga of Moby Dick. Shadows became the characters and the crew, and the coat rack where my grandfather's old fedora felt hat rested came alive as the stern and possessed Captain Ahab. The long story, like Moby Dick, might take several nights to tell. The evening hours my grandfather and I would spend around the kerosene lantern became the center of my summer days. I have so many recollections of that kitchen as the deck of a sailing ship, or the treasure mines of King Solomon. It's hard to recall what the place actually looked like in daylight. My grandfather would ask, well, he would demand, but I see things in a different way. Look at something, he would say, and then look at the things around it. Ask questions of it. What else does it look like? How does it feel? How did it get here? Pick it up with your thoughts and turn it over in your mind. Hold it from the inside and look out at the world through its eyes. Hear its story. Those are some pretty heady instructions for a 5 or 6-year-old child. And because I love my grandfather, I did my best to follow it. Shredded wheat wasn't breakfast. It was an adventure. You're eating wheat all the way from Kansas, you declared before launching on a tail of covered wagons of a long journey west through prairie fires and floods. If you chew it carefully, you can taste history. That was just cereal. A teaspoon of sugar, that became an excuse for the tales of the plantations in Cuba, pirates, buccaneers, slaves, and freemen. Everything had a story, and everything was connected to something else, and the parts together were the world we lived in. When we walked in the woods, he kept challenging me to see. To look around. Don't just walk. Don't just be there. Be part of what you're seeing. Be part of the woods. Be part of the woods. I'm here. "What is that?" he would ask, pointing at a stone wall. "What do you see over there?" He did not want to hear a reply like, "Well, Grandpa, that's a stone wall." What we both knew was a rock wall. The question was, what else could it be? And that was all part of the game. I would look at the moss-covered rocks and squint my eyes and let my 6-year-old imagination take over. I look at the moss-covered rocks. My grandpa was shouting, "There's the wall of a high castle. See the towers over there where the rocks have fallen? That's the gate of the mighty castle." Now the game was on. Pointing to tiger lily gently blowing in the breeze, he would ask me, "What are those?" I would ask him how to describe the pennants, the flags of the king. And the dragonflies, they became the falcons of royalty. All day long our game would continue as we reworked the forests and the fields around the farmhouse into the enchanted lands of mighty kingdoms. Grandfather taught me that everything could look like something else. With imagination, we can transform the world into whatever we want it to be. We walk in the woods. One of the favorite stories was Gulliver's Travels and the Little People. You say, if you hear that story, you haven't experienced the story until you can see the world from the little person's point of view. And you lie down on the ground. This big, hulking, old guy, he'll lie down on the ground, rest his cheek against the sand. So now, close your top eye. That's too high up because these are little people. People's bottom eye open. Now, look at what the world has become. That simple act transformed. Ferns became trees. Trees became cliffs, walls, mountains. The pathway between them. What an amazing experience. Each week of each summer, my grandfather's house became a school of dreams. But as always the case, as I grew older, so did he. One winter, my parents, my sister, my brother, and I visited. This visit was different from all of us. He lay sick in bed. Every time before we were together had been among smiles and laughter and joy. This time the feeling was grim. Few words were spoken, and the visit ended almost before it began. By spring, he was dead. The Randall farmhouse stood silent and empty. The house remained vacant as I entered and finished high school. My visits to the old place became less and less frequent. Each time I returned, the weather, the ravages of time, and vandals had taken a little more away. The hand-blown glass windows were shattered. The cast iron wood stove lay smashed on the kitchen floor. Empty beer bottles and trash was everywhere. The horsehair plaster walls and ceilings sang and cracked in every room. It hurt to visit the place, so I stopped visiting. I'd rather remember what it had looked like. Some fool had thrown a shopping cart down the well. The yard had become a sea of weeds. The tiger lilies had vanished. While overseas in Vietnam, I received a letter from my mother telling me the house had been sold and torn down, and the land sold to a developer, and the oak beams, crafted by the children of pilgrims, were now in the lot of a developer in Connecticut. Sand and gravel filled the cellar hole. Years after I returned from the war, I finally paid a visit to the Pumpkin Woods. In place of my grandfather's house was a litter-strewn clearing. Nothing remained of the old place. I looked at the bushes that had grown up in its place, and I decided to practice what my grandfather had taught me. I closed my eyes, slowly reopened them, and let my imagination run free. The leaves gradually turned to walls. The canopy of trees became the roof, and the spaces between reformed into windows. The old farmhouse was still there. It hadn't changed a bit. I just had to look a little harder to see it.